John 1:14, so the Word, right? We've been talking about the Word the whole time since John 1:1. The Word that was in the beginning with God, who was a God, one of the sons of God. That's made more clear to us here. The Word became flesh and resided among us. And we had a view of his glory, a glory such as belongs to an only begotten Son. The sons of God are gods. God said it, Psalm 82. Jesus defended it and himself using it, John 10. And we have numerous examples that we've talked about before where the angels are either called gods or sons of God, which means the same thing. And that's what Jesus is. He's just the main one. He's the firstborn. He's the only begotten one. It doesn't say anything other than only begotten Son from a Father, or only begotten from a Father, only begotten with a Father. I'm going to go ahead and turn to that verse, but I'm going to keep it here for a moment because I want to share that text from Proverbs, which we'll get into further in a moment, on the whole begotten creation issue. But let's stay with this. So we know we've got begotten here, right? Monogenes. I believe it's fairly clear at this point that the translations and Trinitarian apologists who have argued for translations of monogenes as only, like it's monos, and without any kind of temporal association like child. But in this case, I think there'd be a little bit of a more confusion with using only child because God has other sons. That's the whole point of John 10 and other texts. But so that's why I think the generation in view here is unique, because Jesus is not God's only son. Just like Isaac is not Abraham's only son. He's his only begotten or uniquely begotten through a promise from the Father. And in Jesus' case, made directly by the Father as the firstborn. We'll do further in a moment. It's a uniquely begotten sense that appears to be at least legitimate, and if not likely, in these unique instances where the subjects, the ones being called only begotten, Isaac in Hebrews 11, the Word or Jesus in John 1, there's other sons that the one begetting both Isaac and Jesus have. So when you say only child or only begotten, you're really only child would just create more problems. Only begotten is closer because it gets more into the generative aspect that's not shared by every other child of God. Uniquely begotten, I believe, makes that explicit and also captures the unique element inherent in monos, as well as the genes part, the generation part. Not that you have to break it apart, but just to explain it to you. So, only begotten, unique, I think uniquely begotten in the case of only begotten being applied to a child that has other siblings. I think unique, and they both fit because both Isaac's case and Jesus' case are a unique generation. In Jesus' case, directly by the Father. In Isaac's case, the only child of Sarah and Abraham according to a promise made at a time when she likely wouldn't have otherwise had children. So there's a uniqueness associated with that. It's not a only childness that's highlighted. There's a unique aspect, an only begotten aspect that isn't shared by the other children, which is consistent with the firstborn usage for Jesus in association with his sonship and with arche, right? All of these unique descriptions fit perfectly. So this only begotten with or from a father, it doesn't use the article there, and so I think a father is probably correct here because it's more talking about the kind of glory you would see, like if you saw an only begotten or unique child or the only child with a father, how precious that would be for a father to have his only child there with him, right? So that's what John is saying. He's saying the kind of glory we got to see was from this only begotten, this monogenes that was with the Father. We get to see his glory. It says that, the glory of him. What kind of glory did the Word have as a God in the beginning? That of an only begotten. Right here. They got a view of the glory of an only begotten Son with or from a Father. They got a view of his glory. And then John describes that glory that way. Now let me ask you, Trinitarians, is the Father's glory that of a monogenes with a Father? No, it's not, is it? The Father's glory is therefore not the same as the Son's. So while it is also shared by the Son because the Father gives him his glory that he had with him, right? There's a shared glory for sure. I'm not saying that. They're very similar in ways that you can't even tell them apart really in the spirit realm likely, but being an imprint depends in terms of the association with that, right? Even the imprint and seal of the wax is noticeably different from the seal in the ring, even if its imprint is identical. You can tell that the wax and the imprint is not the same as the seal on the ring because of the material, the nature of the object. And even if you had metal being pressed into metal, like I gave in my analogy on that Hebrews 1 video, that's still a separation. You're making an imprint into another thing that requires temporality. You cannot have an imprint if they're both the same age, eternal. There's no imprinting. The Trinitarians create this ridiculous association between generation and eternity, and it just negates the whole meaning of the term in the first place. Right? They're just destroying the meaning of the term, just like firstborn, because they can't have it. Can they not have it because the text doesn't teach it? No. They can't have it because the doctrine of the Trinity tells them no. No, Trinitarians. You cannot accept a temporal meaning for only begotten. That has to be outside of time. That has to be understood in light of eternal generation. Though it's not in the text, you have to do that. And there's a difference between begotten and created. And so, it's not the same, even though it is the same. I'm going to show you that in a moment. And we're outside of time anyway, so who cares, right? That's just that they can't stay in this text like we are and just, okay, we saw his glory was the type from an only begotten with the Father. He's a Son, unique association, monogenes. There's other sons, we know that. Job 37, John 1, Genesis 1. In terms of the creative observance, the sons of God and their potential involvement, let us make. That could be the Father and the Son. Either way, the sons of God were there in the beginning, according to Job 38:7. And here, the word is differentiated from them by monogenes. That's the glory he had. That's the firstborn glory. He's number one. The Trinitarians have us thinking number one is number none. Right? He's not good enough to even be number one. What do you mean? He's created. Okay, he's created, yeah. He's the very first creation of Almighty God as an imprint of his being. The exact expression of his glory, which we know is not the same according to that text and this text, because it's that of an only begotten from a Father, with the Father, imprinted by the Father. So when we see these things, we don't have to vacate the obvious associations and meanings, temporality being the primary one in these instances, because otherwise there is no meaning, right? Well, if it doesn't mean Jesus was imprinted in time at some point by the Father as the exact copy of his being, what's the imprinting? What, there's just always been this metaphysical imprinting that's just been permanently there, and it's an imprinting, but it's always been there, and so it's never really had to happen. It's just always been in it. I don't even understand the concept because it makes no sense according to the text, right? If you wanted to just say it's in the text and so we don't have to understand it, Greg, that's fine. I can accept that if that's what the text teaches. I don't have to accept it then if I accept the text and what it teaches. That's not in the text. Okay, the kind of eternal generation and thing, that's next stuff. And you know it. We all know it. I'm going to show it another time. But before you Trinitarians keep blowing it, I would like you to just think of what you're asking us to do. You're asking us to add to these texts the very thing you claim we do, right? And for so long claimed, right? Adding an A to the text, get out of here. You guys do the same thing in other texts. You just don't care about those as much. And so you make a big issue about the text you care about, but not the ones you don't care about. And you're not even right about either one. Maybe the ones you don't care about because you don't care about them because they're correct. But these ones bother you because you're not, and we are. We've proven it. You don't really have any arguments left. Just the Trinity. Just adding things like eternity when they're not there. When they're actually indicating temporality. Like everywhere. Firstborn, only begotten, Son, beginning. And we get none of it, right? We don't, all these terms, we get none of them. Granted life to have it, life in himself. Beginning of the creation by God. Proverbs 8, right? We're going to get to in a moment. We get none of it. Trinitarians somehow are able to dismiss all of those temporal terms and associations, describing the relationship between Jesus and his Father and his theos, right? Monogenes theos, or monogenes huios, because his Son and theos, as we've talked about, are the same thing. Even Jesus showed that. John 10, his debate with the Jews, he won it. Quoted the text. We do the same. And so when we talk about only begotten, my friend, the Trinitarians have made us afraid to accept what it means because somehow they've just made us disconnect from the text time. And if they don't succeed there, then begotten's different from creation, which is not true, as I'll show next. And so this is what I was getting at earlier, right? Simplify. That's why I don't appreciate a lot of these guys. I respect Wallace, Hartley, Bowman, White, all of them for their knowledge and their dedication to certain things. But the way they have complicated or just, adopted what others have complicated throughout the history of these debates, I'm not saying they don't, it's just not that they don't have a reason for it, but that level of complication for these simple things, that bothers me, right? And I don't think we need to do that. And it seems like they're using it intentionally to get away with a post-biblical doctrine, right? We can't even read the text together and just read it anymore. It has to have all these other meanings that they import, right? They're not there. And if we don't call them on it, then we won't be there. We'll be like, okay, we're out of time. No, we have to be right here. What does the text say? What does it mean? Most likely. They want to take the most remote potential meaning in some way just to get out of a difficult text. Fine, go to the next. And just keep establishing that yours is the best each time, each way. And they're choosing the least likely option just to salvage a doctrine that they don't need to worship the Father correct. And if you do, Trinitarians, fine, but leave us alone. We do it correct. We're not adding to the texts. And neither were Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower and the NWT in most of these texts. You were wrong. You were wrong. And now you're going to be wrong, and yet you are the scholars and grammarians who are wrong at this time. That's going to be hard. That's not easy. I understand. I wish you well. Verse 15, John bore witness about him, talking about Jesus, only begotten from a Father. Yes, he actually cried out. This was the one who said it, saying, the one coming behind me has advanced in front of me, because he existed. He existed. He existed, you non-believers in Jesus, the words in Jesus' pre-existence. He existed before me. And we also know that the Word before he entered the world was the one through whom God made the world, and yet it was his own. Seems like pretty clear pre-existence to me, along with John 1:1 and all the other texts, 8:58. So just a brief note there for you non-Trinitarian, non-pre-existent people. But I think you guys have it, you got the worst position to try to tackle, so I'm not even going to get into it. It's not worth my time. I already dealt with it. You had your time. I don't see you guys did anything with it because you don't really have anything. Even the Trinitarians don't have much left, if anything. So why waste time with people who can't even see the pre-existence, right? I mean, how much time do we have to waste, my friends, with people who can't see these things? Just to argue with them? Just because they challenged you? You know, I think I'd have a better time with someone who has no knowledge of these things and just wants to learn things right. If I could find those people, I would never even be talking to these Trinitarians and others who already know these things unless I absolutely had to. Because there's no point, right? I'm just reading texts that are plain and they're wasting my time. At this point, I know that. It took me a while to know that. I know that. Now I know that. I'm not going to waste too much time with these guys anymore. But I still have a little time left. Verse 16, for we all received from out of his fullness, talking about the Word, the only begotten from a Father, even undeserved kindness upon undeserved kindness. Verse 17, because the law was given through Moses, the undeserved kindness and the truth came to be through Jesus Christ. Final verse, at least for a while. I've really enjoyed these videos with you guys in terms of the Bible and Trinity and conflict. And we'll get back to them again, but we're going to take a break for a while. So let's listen carefully to our last text. It may be our most important in some respects. Although it's kind of hard to beat John 1:1, in my opinion. Right? 1:1b, John 10. I mean, there's so many. No man, no human, but we'll just say man as it says here, has seen. Harao. That's the verb. No man has seen God at any time. And yet, if we go to Judges, the book of Judges, and we read the account of Manoah and his wife, seeing the angel of Jehovah, they identified the being as the angel of God. And then when that angel ascends in the flame of the altar that they make, to sacrifice to God, they say, according to almost every, if not every Bible you will read at Bible Hub or any place that I saw, every translation I checked of the account in Judges 13, where Manoah and his wife see this heavenly being ascend in the flame, say, we have seen God. G-O-D. But it says right here, no man has seen God. Well, was Manoah a man, Trinitarians? Why do all of your Bibles that I read in English, in Judges 13, contradict this text? Every one of them. Why? Why can't you Trinitarians bring yourselves to, when it comes to texts like Judges 13 and the angel ascending in the flame off the altar being referred to as Elohim or God, Theos? Why can't you Trinitarians translate it that way? A God? Why can't you translate Judges 13 where the heavenly being identified as an angel is called Elohim Theos, when you know that's not God, you know they saw a being there, you translate that text capital G-O-D as if Manoah and his wife saw God, when we're told right here in a text you accept that never happened. And all of you people who believe Moses saw God in the burning bush, that never happened. It was God's sons, you see. And if you could read more carefully and not go to the later texts and creeds, you would find out very easily that the sons of God stand in the place of their Father. They're given his name. They're given his authority. They talk as if they're him. So much so that Jesus even says in John 14, what? Have I been with you so long a time, Philip, or Thomas and Philip, all the people there? I believe it was, I sometimes, the accounts where Thomas and others doubt him. I get the names mixed up. But in John 14, when he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, he uses a form of the verb harao. Just like in John 1:18, no man has seen harao. Okay. So how are we going to handle that then? Have they seen God or not is what I'm getting at, Trinitarians. It doesn't seem like you have a very good answer if you're translating Judges 13 in a way that explicitly contradicts John 1:18. Right? So you can explain, I guess, the way you do everything else, that in Judges 13 you'd think that's just another person of the Trinity. I know you do. I know that. It doesn't make a difference. We're talking about the text. I'm not interested in your explanation unless it's explicitly resulting from the text. It is not. The angel in Judges 13, whom they said they saw and was Elohim, God, theos, singular. We got the singular there in the Septuagint, and we have the plural in John 10. So you're wrong on all counts that the sons of God are not gods in the same way that Jesus says he is, which is why he uses that text in his defense. But I'm just concerned and curious about why you're presenting such an obvious contradiction for people. Why you have such a hard time translating a reference to another angelic son of God as a God when you know that wasn't God who they saw, and you know the sons of God are gods that both God and Jesus show. I'd like to know why you have such. Is it the polytheism thing? Well, then the answer is the same. It's not a problem. We just read the text and it says they're gods in this sense. So the sense in which you think it's a problem is not the sense of the text. So stop using that term. Stop using a term that doesn't capture the right sense. And then it might make sense. No man has seen God at any time. Thank you all for joining me tonight, by the way. The only begotten God. How about that? We have a text with early representation in papyri and codices like Vaticanus, Sinaiticus. There are also many other texts that read Son here, where the text in John 1:18 uses God in association with MONOGENES. It very clearly, in this text that the NWT is translating in several ancient texts, shows that the belief that the Word that was with God in the beginning was a specific kind of God. He had a specific kind of glory, the glory that is that of an only begotten who's with the Father. And then that same thing that marks his glory, him being only begotten, marks his deity. I was going to do another sign, but I pulled it back. You understand what I'm saying? If verse 14 right here says that monogenes marks his glory, and then in just a few verses later, when it says we haven't seen the God that's this Father that he's getting this glory from, right? That the glory is from, it belongs to an only begotten with the Father. The monogenes is directly associated with the glory of the Word that was revealed in the flesh. He dwelt in among us. And monogenes is also the thing, the term, the adjective, right? It can be a noun, but in this case, it's modifying theos. So the kind of theos that the Word is cannot be the same kind of theos the Father is. We know that from John 1:1, 1:1b, and 1:1c. But here, follow again. Let me make it clear, if I haven't already. Monogenes is directly associated with the kind of glory the Word has, and that we saw in part. We had a view of it that he got while he was with the Father. Verse 18, it's telling us that that marks the kind of God he is. But the Father does not have a monogenes glory, nor is he a monogenes theos. He can't be. He's the Father. The Trinitarians are defying every known parental association They are defying basic familial representation. And it's so plain, is it not? He can't be the God he's with. He can't be the monogenes theos, if you're talking about the Father. They can't be the same because they're with each other as theos, and the theos is not the same. One is a monogenes theos. It's the glory that he got while he was with the Father. It's a unique, special kind, begotten from the Father. Now, you want to say begotten and created are not the same. All right. Okay. First, let's finish this text. The only begotten God who is in the bosom with the Father. Right? Because now he's been resurrected, and John's writing, looking back and stating since his resurrection, he's back with the Father. The glory he had before he became flesh that we saw a view of through the text is marked by monogenes right here. Plain as day. Then the God that the Word is, the type of God, is also marked in the exact same way, by the exact same term. And even if you say son, we've already learned the sons of God are gods. Over and over again, this is not a hidden thing. It's a clear teaching. Jesus used it in his defense. So it means basically the same thing, right? It doesn't make a difference. He was begotten as a son of God. He's a God who is a son of God, just like the sons of God, Father. I mean, the imagery and symbolism is consistent in every way, and yet the Trinitarians are denying all these things, right? No temporality, no separation in terms of nature. All the things that we see in nature and that the Father made through the Son so we could understand these ones, because they use the terms that we were made with and understand and use to understand what we can't understand. And we can't even understand that because the Trinitarians say it's not that. Well, begotten doesn't mean begotten. Doesn't mean created. We'll talk about it in a moment. We're outside of time. In the beginning, it's outside of time. Right? No, it's an eternal generation. Right? Generation. You still want kind of a generation like a born type thing, like Isaac, Abraham, Sarah. It's eternal with them. So it doesn't matter what we do is what I'm getting at and going back to. They're just going to change it to fit what they can't allow. They're never going to allow temporality. Doesn't matter how many terms. Arche, protatikos, monogenes, huios. It doesn't make a difference. It never did. Not once the Trinity set in. That's what made the difference. That's what's making the difference. Even though this very one who's called the only begotten God is said to have explained him. We're sitting here arguing about all this stuff. And I'm happy to do it because I think it helps right now. But did he not explain this? Why don't we know this yet? Why aren't we united in a way that accepts that the only begotten God, the monogenes theos, or only begotten Son, sons of God are gods. They're with God. I said you were gods. Even used it in his defense. So this is not a mystery. It all makes sense. Why is it then that with all these texts and with this text telling us that the one from the Father is the only begotten God, God in a different sense from the Father, explained him? It's almost like, it doesn't matter what he says. We can't understand it because the Trinitarians and others have created all these requirements to accept the text as legitimate. And yet the text tells us none of it. Let's look at it. So let's go back briefly to this whole idea of begotten versus created. And we'll first look at a text in Genesis. I had it right here. Genesis 6:7. Let's go to that right now. So is begotten the same as created, right? The texts were pretty clear, were they not? We didn't need to get into the variants, right? We could deal with God, Son, monogenes. It's indisputable. Monogenes really at this point primarily means unique generation or only child of a person. There's generation involved though. It's not like just only or unique and no generation at all. It's what Trinitarians want you to think. But even they're seeing the light, at least some of them. Or they just don't have any arguments left to present this non-generative view of the term. It's just theological now. Right? They're not getting it from the term or the text. They just don't like the way it comes out. Genesis 6. You're going to love this because it's so clear, and I'm really tired of hearing how Trinitarians seem to hate almost a created Son of God. I can't believe they dare blaspheme the Son of God like that, right? I mean, even if you don't agree that he's firstborn in a temporal sense, Trinitarians, you have to see, you have no evidence, none at all, to support this idea that being the firstborn real creation of God is a bad idea. You can't be what Jesus said to be and be that idea. No. It's actually the highest level of existence next to God himself. That is not bad. It's not bad at all. Even if he's created. And you have not shown that at all. And you have maintained it. And you've made a lot of people feel bad about thinking of the Son of God as a Son of God, as a firstborn, as an only begotten. You know what? Maybe it's time you feel bad. Maybe it's time you feel bad about demeaning the Son of God. Maybe it's time, Trinitarians, you think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and make really sure being created first is bad. I want you to prove it before you keep using it. Or use something else, because I'm worried about you if you keep doing that kind of thing and blaspheming our view of the Son of God. It has more credibility than you're willing to admit. And it's time you start admitting it, or you're going to lose credibility. Not just with me, but with the Son of God. Because you're demeaning him. You are taking away terms that are for him. And then we don't even know who is the firstborn of God, right? Trinitarians would have us think there's either no real first creation of God, or we just so unimportant we don't know who it is. It's not the Word. It's not the Son. It's not the only begotten one. It's not the beginning of the creation by God. It's not the one in Proverbs 8 who says she was created as the beginning of God's ways. It's not that. Genesis 6. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so are the Trinitarians correct? Are they right? Am I wrong? Am I making too big of a deal about this whole, well, he's begotten but not created, and there's a difference thing? And so, while I still feel Trinitarians have no evidence, no justification for this denigration of a created Son of God, you have nothing. Nothing. Nothing at all. And you keep doing it. You keep making it seem like we're blasphemers because we believe in a real firstborn Son of God. Incredible. Genesis 6:7. Look at this. It says, so Jehovah said, I'm going to wipe men whom I have created off the surface of the ground. Who is he talking about here, Trinitarians? Who are the men that he created? Because the Hebrew term is bara. The Greek is poieo. It doesn't use genao. It uses bara, just like Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Trinitarians, are the heavens and the earth living in the same way that humans are living? Because Genesis 1:1 said God created them. And Genesis 6:7 says God created men. And he's going to wipe out the ones he created? So is that just Adam? Because every other man after Adam was what, Trinitarians? Begotten. There's no difference. That's why there's no difference made here between Adam and all those begotten men and women. being talked about as creations. Bara. Now, let's go to Proverbs 8. This is the text that's going to steal the show in this context. Because not only can we see here clearly that created is used of those who are begotten, there's really no difference, right? It's just the manner. Humans are born through a process, a reproductive cycle, whereas things that aren't in a birthing process, they're just created in a way based on whatever Jah the Father brings out of himself. All things are of the Father. But in humans created a cycle, a reproductive process that still gives life to new life, right? It starts with one, two come together, create a new one. But it's still creation. The child is begotten, but that's the same thing. Jehovah, the Father, creates us in our mothers, in the combination of genes that we inherit from our fathers. So it's just a different type of creation. But it doesn't justify claiming that one is temporal and the other is not. You have no basis for doing that. And you don't even have a basis for differentiating creation from begetting. I'm going to show it even further right now. Proverbs 8. We'll take a look at a few more texts and wrap this up, friends. I really appreciate you all staying up. I wanted to give a little more time and feeling and just really think about some things more deeply with you all, being that this will be the last Bible and the Trinity video for a little while, and it concludes our prologue of John series. But in Proverbs 8, let's take a look at this whole creation begetting thing, because we've already established that there really is no difference when it comes to things that are created, where there is a difference in the sense of non-living things being created and living things being created or birthed through a process, but it's still creation. The reference that John makes in Genesis 6. He doesn't distinguish Adam, who he created from the dust, from the ones who were born after being begotten. Proverbs 8:21. So as we know, right, in Proverbs 8:22, I should say, we've discussed this text in separate videos. So I'm not going to get into the typical elements, the whole kana meaning and stuff. I've talked about it. But I'm bringing it up to show a contrast between created and begetting, and to show that there really is no difference. Not even in the text where the terms are used by the ancient Greek writers. So here in Proverbs 8:21, in the Greek text, it uses a form of katizo. So it says in the NWT, Jehovah himself produced me, right here. But in the Greek text, it says created me, which is what kana means anyway. Same like with Eve when she said, I have begotten or created a child or a man with the help of Jehovah in Genesis. Right? It uses kana there. And she didn't go buy or get Cain. She created Cain in the same way that Genesis 6 says, I'm going to wipe out all men whom I've created, and yet some were directly created like Adam, and others begotten. And yet it's really seen as the same thing because they're given a start to their life. They're made after they're begotten in a creative sense. It's still a start to life that never leaves the ideas associated with begotten in that sense of a human and the birthing process. That is the exact imagery we're given of the Son with the Father. So right here, as we know the evidence is overwhelmingly clear in the Bible that Jesus is the wisdom of God. The early church writers, even for the most part, accepted that. They just got lost eventually in the whole, again, eternal generation thing, or with Jesus as a man and different things. They have anything but what the texts teach when it comes to the Trinity, because they just can't have it. Remember, I told you that they can't. Once they accept temporality with the Son in relation to the Father, it's it. It's game over. So they can't have any of these texts do that. Not Colossians 1:15, not Revelation 3:14, not John 5:26, not John 1:18, and not Proverbs 8. Even though it says right here, Jehovah produced me as the beginning of his way. Kana, and in the Greek, katizo. Trinitarians. Greek text uses katizo right here. Creation. You say there's a difference between creation and begetting. The text says there's not. Look at verse 25. Before the mountains themselves had settled down ahead of the hills, I was brought forth as with labor pains. Gena me. Before all hills he begets me. Begets me. Verse 21, created me. Jehovah created me as the beginning of his way. Katizo, Trinitarians. Greek writer, ancient Greek Jewish writer. Verse 21, katizo me. Created me. Verse 25, gena me. Katizo and ganao are used in the exact same context for the exact same being that corresponds to only one other being who himself claimed to be that being, as I showed in my article long ago. Jah loves her, his son, the Word. And so, you are incorrect. There is not a significant, if any, real difference between creation and begetting. It's proven right here because they mean the same thing. They're used in alternating sequences to show when this being was created. And it matches exactly the descriptions that are given of Jesus, who was said to have been created as the beginning of the creation of God. Revelation 3:14, the firstborn of all creation. Colossians 1:15, the only begotten God. John 1:18. Proverbs 8, wisdom says she was created as the beginning of Jehovah's way. She was begotten, feminine only in the representational sense that wisdom is used, but not in the spiritual sense of gender like we as humans use. We all know that. And Trinitarians want to get lost and caught up on that and try to claim there's a difference between the femininity of wisdom and Jesus as the Word, or as a masculine son of God. Well, then they just deny Jesus himself, don't they? When Jesus himself identifies himself as the wisdom of God, as saying things that the wisdom of God said, like I show in my article. And even up until the Diatessaron of Tatian, we have those two accounts combined as one, with the Son of God saying, I, wisdom. Jesus is the wisdom of God. He says it himself. The early church even believed it. And that's not my main reason for believing it, but it's consistent. They couldn't deny it as easily as Trinitarians do today, or try to. But they cannot deny any more credibly that creation is different from begetting according to the biblical text. They're wrong. They're wrong on that. They're wrong on eternal generation. They're wrong on all this stuff in John 1 being outside of time when it's clearly in time according to the biblical teaching of time. And they're wrong when it comes to the type of God Jesus is.